Hi everybody and welcome back to Geektube Central and our final episode of Season 6 for Game of Thrones. And my god, what a massive amount of stuff to take in. I know it's a bit late on the review, but seriously there's so much to do and so much to talk about, and every part of it is a puzzle piece of basically closing off the season, but also opening up that we're kind of starting in a new kind of fresher direction for the next season. But one of the highlights of the episode definitely was the opening credits, as we remember, and seeing the Stark sigil back in over Winterfell. And that's a big thing considering how long they've been out of Winterfell, and it was so hard fought with the Battle of the Bastards. But let's get straight into the next part of our review, where we're in King's Landing, where it's all kicking off. And as we start the episode, we see a view from the Red Keep of the great Sept of Baelor. And this is foreshadowing, remember this for later on. And it cuts to Cersei, and she's looking at this, and obviously this is the focal point. And the first few minutes of the episode are silent, it's just music and seeing different characters. And we see it cut from various players to Margaery getting ready with her servant. Then it cuts to the High Sparrow. Now he's just getting his shirt putting on, and there's no really any preamble to him getting dressed, but it's just to show you that everybody is going through a ritual and it's about getting ready. It then cuts to Tommen, and what's quite poignant is he has more of a regimen than other people because he's the king, but he has this pensive look on his face, like he's completely nervous of what's to come, and he's quite wary of what's to happen, and understandably so. He's torn because it's about his mother. We even see the nobility, the people of court. They're allowed into this. There's no rabble, there'll be no civilians here. And then it cuts to Loras, who is just this dirty mess, but obviously he will not be presented this way, and Lancel comes in and gets him ready. And as the High Sparrow comes in, there's a lot more pomp and ceremony, but it's still at this point it's very quiet, and the music is playing. Is called The Light of the Seven, and it's violins and organ, it's beautiful. And we see Margaery's there, and the High Sparrow even gives her a nod, and you can tell she's nervous, but you kind of get the expectation that she kind of knows what's going to happen because she's kind of in with the High Sparrow. And as the 7 good Septons take their place ready for the trial, you see Margaery looking quite, she's there, and because we know she's only playing the game, we know that she's quite nervous, and her father and Kevan Lannister is there, and Tommen's sitting waiting, and he still looks very much like a child getting ready, and he's told that the trial will be starting soon. And the final touches to Cersei is getting this little brocade kind of necklace thing that attaches to her clothes. It's more like a piece of jewellery for her clothes. And as Master Pycelle is leaving, he's made alert to by one of the little birds, and she whispers something in his ear. We don't know what it is yet, but trust me, again, foreshadowing. We see Lancel brought in, and he's cleaned up and he's shorn of his hair, but he's not, in a good place. He was a babbling wreck before, and he still is. And this is when the High Septon says, "Are you ready to confess your crimes?" And Lancel says, "No, there will be no need for that. I accept that I'm guilty and I'm willing to admit so." And he says, "I'm going to dedicate my life to the 7. And the High Sparrow says, "You know what this means?" As if to make Loras say it out loud so it doesn't sound like he's being coerced. He says, "Yes, it means I'm going to give up being the heir to High Garden, I'm going to give up my title, and I will never father children." And this floors obviously his sister and his father, and bear in mind, I don't think Margaery knew this was going to be the plan. And the High Sparrow comes away with, it's a good thing, and you'll be forgiven, and the mother, you beg before the mother, and that's the reason why he's kneeling. He's basically reduced Lancel to nothing because he was stripped, and he is nothing because he's been held and tortured for God knows how long. And obviously that leads to him getting the forehead carving of the followers of the Faith Militant, and at that point his father is completely undone and he wants to intervene, and Margaery has to say, "Just think of your religion," and she's trying to be calm, but you can tell she didn't realise that this was the plan. It then cuts to the mountain, and he comes into the room to get, and you assume it's to get Tommen, but he stops Tommen from leaving. And at this point you're like, well, he's not going to hurt him, is he? No, I don't think he will. And then it cuts to Cersei, and you're like, Cersei hasn't shown up yet, and maybe she's trying to stop him or hold him captive. You know, all things are starting to filter through your mind. And it cuts to Margaery, and she goes to the High Sparrow. She says, something's wrong, something's not right. Cersei isn't here. And he says, don't worry about her. We'll get her. She'll come. If she doesn't want to come, we'll make her come. And it'll still happen even if she's not here. And he's so high and mighty he doesn't suspect anything. But we get the feeling, you know, that there's this undercurrent. He tells Lancel, go to the Red Keep and bring back the Queen Mother. And so it cuts to him with a few other people coming out, and he spots this little kid running away. Now, I don't know if the kid was supposed to be seen or he just follows him. And Lancel sees him, goes into this underground bit, and he starts to follow him down. It then cuts back to Master Pycelle, and he's in that little room that we remember where Gregor Clegane was taken care of by Master Qyburn. And he's attacked by all these little kids, the little birds, and they're all stabbing him, and it's quite furious. And it cuts to him on the ground and all bleeding and coughing up blood. And then we see Lancel's found a torch. And as he's picking up the torch, the little kid stabs him right in the kidney, probably quite low in the back. And he ends up, he's not dead, but he's really badly injured. And Margaery, as the music's piping up because you know something's happening, and as we're building up the tension and there's this uneasiness amongst people, and we see Kevan and Margaery's father, we cut back to this sort of underground place where Lancel is lying injured, and we see these dark barrels with green light, and as Lancel looks up, whether he can see it clearly, we can from this angle, there's green pools of liquid with candles in them, and he can see them from this angle. Now, we all seen this stuff before, we remember this from season 2, and Margaery instinctively, because she's smart, she understands something's wrong, and she's trying to tell the High Sparrow, and he's just not going for it. And it cuts to Lancel's face, and there's pain and agony there, but there's this real suspicion, and she's saying to everybody, we have to leave, something's up, this isn't right, I'm going to leave. And as Lancel is trying to move ever closer, there's all this going on, and Margaery's the only one really thinking of this, and she tries to take her brother and pull him away, and the Faith Militant are barging and keeping her close. And even Kevan and that, even this is getting bad, we need to get the hell out of here. And as Lancel gets closer, he sees that this stuff, and he realises what it is, because he probably realises that it's Wildfire. And as she turns to look at the High Sparrow, what we realise for the last time, and it cuts to him, he begins to understand a little too late, and he's basically condemned everybody. And then cuts to Lancel seeing the flame of the candle hitting the wildfire. It cuts to his face, you see the green flame in his eyes, and that's it. From this point, everybody's fucked. And as the fire and the flame pushes back, incinerates Lancel, it then cuts, and this is when you realise this was in Bran's vision, and this was what was mingled in front, and this was something that was going to happen compared to the stuff that we'd seen that wasn't happened, that had happened. And as everything starts to blow up, you realise that's the cache of the wildfire, and we see them hold together, the shock of the vibrations coming up, and the flame hitting the High Sparrow, and he's literally being incinerated, he's vaporized. And as it actually shows the column of it exploding up through the centre of the sept, exploding back, evaporating the bodies, and once it's torn through the flesh of the people, it actually bursts through the 7-pointed star window, as if to say, it's not just symbolism, it's blowing the shit out of everything, and the whole building goes up, and it's just these plumes of green smoke and everything, and you actually see the bell, which had been tolling before, is now not tolling for that reason. It then becomes a projectile in itself and crushes people running away from, obviously, the inevitability. And you see from Cersei's back, and you can see it's her silhouette, and she's seeing the Great Sept just being blown to bits. And she takes a drink, and you realise this has been her plan all along. She was getting ready, but not for this. She had planned this. This is what she'd been whispering to Qyburn in the last episode. And Tommen is watching, and he's realising that, he should have been there. He was denied from going. He realises now that everybody, including his wife, is dead, and that was probably the plan the whole time, and it was Cersei. It then cuts to shame none, Sept of Baelor, and Cersei is pouring her wine all over her to wake her up, which is quite flamboyant considering she could have just used water, but I suppose she was trying to, shame her in her own way. And remember, she promised, she says, I'll be the last face you ever see, and I'm going to make sure you die. And she takes great pleasure in telling her, your gods have forsaken you, the High Septurn's gone, and now you've got a new god. And this is a still with it brightened up. This is Gregor Clegane, aka the Mountain, aka the Zombie Mountain. He's took off his helmet and he's coming in. And she says, shame, shame, and she's taking great, she's just basically bastardizing the thing that Sept of Baelor was doing, and she leaves Sept of Baelor with the mountain, and I don't know what he does with her. Apparently it was going to be a lot more gruesome, but they didn't tell me. I think if he's anything like he did, chances are he's probably going to rape and murder her. We then see Tommen, who's obviously realised that this was his mother's doing. He goes, takes off his crown, and with no preamble at all, you don't even really see his face, he just swan dives right out the window. He just walks like it's the most natural thing. He just gives himself up to it. He is given up, and you realise this is a casualty that Cersei has not bargained for at all. But it's all of her own doing. It then cuts, it's a dark still, but you can see the golden shroud that she saw at the beginning of the season with Myrcella, and this is it, the prophecy she was always worried about. Her son is dead. And Master Qyburn is trying to be nice and say, well, what we should do with the king, and well, she says he should be with his grandfather, his brother and her sister, but you know what? Burn him and bury his ashes in what's left of the Sept of Baelor. And it's not as emotional as you think it could be, although you see her eyes look really glassy as she says the words, but she's kind of accepted it because she's accepted and been afraid of it for so long, and now we're in uncharted territory because now Cersei doesn't have children. And as much as we don't like Cersei, the best part of her was what Jaime said, was her love for her children, and now she doesn't have any children, and now she's by herself. You know what she's willing to do, and she's killed a whole load of people off, and props to the writers, the Weiss and Benioff, and they've obviously planned this out really well, and quite frankly it makes sense that it happened this way, and it's just so tragic that in the end she basically masterminded her own self-destruction with her son, our last remaining child. But we'll talk more about that later on. We then move on to Jaime in the Riverlands at the Twins. And it's all very night, and it's nighttime, and you hear revelling noises from inside the Twins, and you see Walder Frey, and he's toasting, and he's heading up the table, and it's very reminiscent of the Red Wedding because it's the same room. He's even toasting with the same goblet, and he's talking about here's to House Lannister, here's to House Frey, and what's funny is that he mentions House Lannister first, which just goes to show you that he does see himself second in a way to the Lannisters. And it cuts to Jaime, and he's not really listening, he's just sitting there, he doesn't stand up, and when he's basically, Walder's clapping his, own back and celebrating, he even mentions that horrible line, the Freys and the Lannisters send their regards, he's bigging himself up. And the people that he's entertaining are Frey and Lannister soldiers, and of course they're just going to cheer with everybody every time they're going to take a drink because they're all just celebrating and getting drunk. It then cuts to Jaime and Bronn, and Bronn is complaining about how women just seem to fall at Jaime's feet, and that they just want his golden hand up their their twats, and it's really funny. And Jaime mentions that they're not really his type, and Bronn says, they're not blonde enough. Maybe this is a dig to the whole Cersei thing, and there's a funny moment, a look on Jaime's face where he kind of goes, hey, that's a bit too far. And he ends up getting these two serving girls to come over and placate Bronn, and he leaves with the 2 girls. And when just as Bronn's left, Walder Frey comes up and sits down next to Jaime, and he's still going on about how great they are and how they managed to get rid of their enemies. And Jaime questions when was he really in a fight, and he says, well, I got rid of the Tullys, and they've had river runs for like 1,000 years. And there's this look on Jaime's face where he's like, oh, I can't believe he's got the Riverlands. You might have not been pals with the Tullys and everything like that, but to have them have their ancestral home and given to them bastards, the Freys. And Jaime's trying to question him, and Walder says, well, look at the last real fight you were in. You got captured by the young wolf. And he says, what do we care? We're both king slayers. Him killing Robb Stark and him killing, Mad King Aerys. And the fact that he's trying to compare himself and try to get down on a level with Jaime really pisses Jaime off. Because Jaime quite rightly says, well, wait a minute. Your so-called enemies, we're the ones that gave you Riverrun and you lost it. We had to get it back for you. If every time you keep losing Riverrun and we have to ride up north to take it back, what the hell do we need you for? And you can really tell that there's a definite change in Jaime's attitude. He's not just under Cersei's spell, he's not just keeping to himself. You realise that there is good in Jaime, and although he's done what he was commanded to help the Freys win back the Riverlands, you can tell he's upset that he's helping someone that he doesn't really think deserves it, or he really doesn't like the Freys at all. I would even go ahead and say. We then return to King's Landing, where Jaime and Bronn have returned from the Riverlands, and they're literally at the edge of the city, and they've got a small host behind them of Lannister soldiers. And they should be coming back victorious because they've retaken the Riverlands, but then we see that Jaime sees where the Sept of Baelor is, that there's been a fire and it's still smouldering, and it's probably been a few days, but considering the significance of the wildfire and how deep it was in those vaults, that's the reason why it's still smouldering. You can even see a few flickers of flame, I think, in there. And Jaime looks at Bronn, and Bronn, they don't say a word, and you can tell Jaime's completely panicked at this point, and they move on and start to head towards the city. And it then cuts to inside the throne room in the Red Keep, and Cersei's walking with her guard. She's got the mountain just a step or two behind her, and I love the outfit. This is the same outfit she was wearing when the Sept of Baelor was blown up, and the set designer the costume designer did this so that it looked reminiscent of Tywin and his kind of power dressing. And as she stands in front of the Iron Throne, Master Qyburn, who is now Hand of the Queen, says, I now pronounce Cersei Lannister, first of her name, Queen of the Andals and the First Men, and Protector of the Seven Kingdoms. It cuts to Jaime, and he's just watching, and it's all in the eyes. His body looks frozen, and he's watching. And as she gets ready to sit down in the throne, and she's getting ready to get crowned, you're kind of unsure if she really wanted it this way, because she's always wanted to be queen, she's always wanted power, but obviously she didn't want her son to be dead. And at this point, who else would they have chosen anyway? There's nobody else, nothing from the Baratheon line and from the Lannister line to really fill this space. And Master Qyburn puts on a crown specially created for her, and she takes her seat on the Iron Throne. And I swear, even though there's lots of people in the room and the braziers are on, they're there, and there's just this tension, and you realise that she looks just like the Mad King. This isn't going to end well with her on the throne. I mean, look what she did to get the throne. And she sees Jaime, and she's looking at him, and there's so much in it, and you realise that Jaime's going, did she mean for this to happen? And she's watching him as if to say, well, what do you expect? I'm kind of confused and kind of all mixed up about what they're thinking, but it's all in the eyes. And I honestly think he's looking at her and thinking, she's completely mad. Look what she's done. She's killed people, she's blew people up. I knew she was a bit crazy, but look what she's done. And now she's sitting on the Iron Throne. Now she has all this power. And remember, he's seen he tried to prevent the Mad King from using Wildfire, and he did. But look at the Mad King, he had to kill him to stop him from using any of that Wildfire, and in the end, Cersei ended up doing it by herself. And now he, even though he loves her, has to contend with the fact that she's completely unhinged, she doesn't have her children, and whether he's going to bring this up or whatever, I think he would blame her. I mean, it was one thing trying to clear the way and protect herself, but she did so at her son's, cost, at his life. And in a funny way, her being queen is going to make things a bit more simple now, because she's definitely an antagonist now. There's nothing redeeming about her. And this won't end well with her and Jaime, I don't think. But we'll get into more of this later on. We then move on to a much lighter scene in Old Town in the Reach, where Sam and Gilly arrive to go to the Citadel. And they arrive by cart just outside of the city and in view of the Citadel. And as they look across, you see the beautiful magnificence of the white marble and everything in the white building, and you see these little dots. These are the white ravens being released, because it's a sign that winter is coming. And as he comes to the Citadel equivalent of the receptionist, I would assume, he hands in his paper saying, I'm going to be the new Maester at Castle Black. And there's this funny part where the man reads the book and he's like, I have down here that it's Jorah Mormont is the Lord Commander and, Maester Aemon. He says, well, things have changed since then, and he updates it and tells him that, there's a new Lord Commander and that Master Aemon died, and that's the reason why he's here. He's allowed to go through to the library to wait, obviously. And the significance of this is as he comes in, you see all these astrolabes. Now, the reason why this is significant is this is the thing we see in the opening credits that is above the map of Westeros. And this little bit here is this part where the dragons are attacking, and it's telling the story of what's happening up until the point of season 1 where the Baratheons take over from the Targaryens. And as he's looking up, he's completely awestruck, because this is his idea of heaven. And it's good that Sam's finally going somewhere where he's going to be amongst like-minded people, because he's much more of a book reader and he will be a good maester. Unfortunately, I didn't think that they needed to drag it out so long that it took all season for him to get there. I did like the scenes with his father Randall Tarly back at Horn Hill, but I think they could have tied that storyline up quicker and maybe even had him find out from a raven, or send a raven and find out that Jon's not there. It would have been nice, but obviously that's something that's going to have to be picked up on next season. We then move on to a small scene, but very pivotal. I know we haven't been in Dorne for a while, but we are returning to Sunspear for the first time since episode 1 of season 6. And in it we see that a very upset, vengeful, and in mourning Lady Olenna, Queen of Thorns, is taking an audience with Ellaria Stand and the Sand Snakes. Now, as they're speaking, there's this funny part where Obara tries to speak up and say things, and she's like, oh, you came to Dorne and we're here to help you. And Lady Olenna's like, who are you? Barbara? She's like, Obara. She's like, hey, no. She says, you look like a mad little boy. And it cuts to her other sister, and then it cuts, and she just cuts them off, doing what us as the viewers have said. Like, they've not been received well, so they've cut that out. And Lady Olenna explains, I've had the future stolen from me. Cersei's took my son, my grandson, and my granddaughter. I don't want to survive. Because they are, Cersei has declared war on House Tyrell and on Dorne, just like Ellaria Sand says. And she says, I'm sorry, I should have said it differently. I'm not offering you survival. I'm offering you your heart's desire. And she rings a little bell, which is quite comical. And it cuts, and you immediately know who this is, purely from the silhouette. It's Varys the Spider. And you realise this is where he's been heading up. And as she looks up, and she'll recognise him because she's been in court and knows who he is, Varys only says 3 words: fire and blood. And this is a pivotal scene. This is something that makes sense. Now, as much as they haven't been received well, Ellaria Sand, since season 5, with the Sand Snakes and the whole Dornish storyline, this makes a lot of sense. And the reason why I've cut the episode the way I have is because I like to do it by house, because sometimes people get a bit confused about scenes happening so quick and they're like, how did Varys get to it with Daenerys? And this comes up soon. In the book, sometimes things happen at the same time, some things happens at different times, but I've tried to kind of change the order so that you understand that where he is in Dorne, he's at this point and he eventually gets to the next point, which is the end part with House Targaryen scenes. But we'll get on to that in a minute. We then move on to another small but very pivotal scene where we're back in the Riverlands at the Twins and with House Frey. And we see Walder Frey sitting eating his pie, and the serving girl that we noted from earlier on that was making the eyes or giving eye attention to Jaime is serving him some pie, and he's a complete lich. He says, "You're not one of mine, eh, because you're too pretty," and he slaps her on the arse and he makes this lecherous face and he licks his lip. It's very disgusting. The actor who plays him is fantastic. But nonetheless, he's complaining about where's Black Walder and Lothar, they should be here, and she says, "They're here, my lord." And he says, "Where are they?" He says, "Trimming their cunt hairs." It's really funny. And she says, "No, they're here, my lord." And she points to the pie, and he lifts the pie crust, and you see a digit in it. Could be a thumb, could be a big toe, we don't know. And he's completely horrified, and he looks over at her, and she says, "Yeah, they were particularly hard to carve, particularly Black Walder." And he's completely in shock at this. And it cuts to his face because it's the realization as she pulls off her face, and then you get that eureka moment. It's Arya, it's Arya, it's her, it's been her the whole time. And she says, "My name is Arya Stark, I just wanted you to know that. And the last thing you're going to see is a Stark smiling down at you as you die." And that's like, yes, finally, we're going to get some frickin' revenge. And you bear in mind that she must have been there for hours or days just to set this up. And as he turns to try and get away, she grabs him, she pulls out her knife, and she slashes right deep into his throat. And this picture here, he's thrashing and dying, and it's like she keeps his body pressed against her as if to feel the life draining out of his system, and as he's dying, and as she lets go and he's looking up at her, you see as he's choking on his own blood, it is true, she's smiling down on him as he is dying, and you can just tell in her mind, she's like, 1 down, 2 to go, because the other 2 names she mentioned before was Cersei and the Mountain. Now, the only thing I'm wondering is, does she add Ellen Payne to this? This is something I thought that she did have on her list before, but never mind. The fact that she's killed him, that's a big boon for her. The fact that she's made it across from Braavos, and actually Braavos isn't that far from where she is. And now you're hoping, will we get to see her back in Winterfell by the end of the episode, end of the season, or will we have to wait? In our first visit to the north, we return to Winterfell, which is now completely under control of the Starks, which is fantastic. And we see a white raven flying over to Winterfell, and that was one of the ravens released at the Citadel. And inside we see Jon lamenting about how this is the room and the table that my family would sit at. They would sit here, and I would be sitting up the back. Because that's obviously implied because he's a bastard. And Melisandre says, "Well, you should be lucky that you were even at feasts and you had a family." And this little scene is interrupted with Sir Davos, and he comes in and he throws the burnt stag to Melisandre, who catches it. And she knows what this makes because her face is... She knows what this means because you see the startled look on her face. And he urges her to admit what she's done. Who did it belong to? And she admits that it belonged to the Princess Shireen. And at that moment he says, admit what you did, And she says, "We burnt her at the stake." And you can see Jon's completely taken aback. Now, he is indebted to her, but at the end of the day, his honour wouldn't permit what kind of thing she did. And he says, "You killed her, she was good, she kind, and you killed her." And you see his eyes are so glassy, and he's so upset, and he's so full of rage, and I completely feel it. And she's trying to justify, you know, the army was strapped, the horses were strapped, and the horses were dying, and at that point there's no justification. And even though Sir Davos says, you know, look what happened, everybody died anyway, and your lord is evil, and at that point Jon says, ride south, don't ever come back to the north or I'll hang you myself. And even Sir Davos says, if you do, I'll kill you. It then cuts and you see her riding away on her horse. And in a way it's good that she wasn't killed off, because I don't think this is the last we're going to see of her. We then see Sansa joining him at the ramparts. Obviously, they're both thinking different things. She admits, you know, I should have told you about what happened with, you know, when writing a letter to Littlefinger and getting the Lords of the Vale to come. And he says, you were right. He says, but we need to stick together because we're all we've got. And he kisses her, and it's really nice, showing some togetherness, because obviously Littlefinger's decisive, you know, he can split you apart. And Sansa says, a white raven came from the Citadel, winter is here. And Jon smiles, and he's completely sunny and full of sunshine when he smiles, and he says, well, father always said it was coming. And it's a nice thing that happened. The scene then cuts to Sansa sitting at the heart tree, but she's not praying, and she tells Baelish so. She says, you know, I don't believe in that anymore. I did it every day when I lived here as a child, but I didn't understand, you know, comparing what I wanted to what I had. And he comes and tries to speak to her. He says, oh, well, that was when you were a child and everything. You're a woman now. And he explains about when she asks him, what do you want? Now, she said earlier with Jon, I don't know, I don't trust him. He's untrustworthy. And he finally admits something that he's never admitted before. He admits that, you know, basically he wants her, and that he imagines himself, everything he's done, every move he's ever made, is because he ultimately wants to be sitting on the Iron Throne with her at his side. And he tries to lean in for a kiss, and she presses him back, and she starts to walk away. And although he's been rebuffed in one sense, he's trying to reiterate her, because he knows that she doesn't trust him. And he says, well, I've declared for the North, the Stark, for all to see. And he says, that doesn't change anything. You've declared for other houses. And he says, no, this time is different. Forget the past. He says, you need to think about, everybody's going to find out about the battle, you know, the Battle of the Bastards. And they're going to be interested. And when it comes down to it, who should people stand behind? Should it be the true-born daughter of Ned and Catelyn Stark, or a motherless bastard from the south? I think that what Peter Baelish is trying to do is try to sow the seeds of distrust between Jon and Sansa, and the fact that because he probably doesn't like Jon for the fact that as a bastard he has managed to rally around people of the North to fight for him. He's achieved something that he can't achieve because that's not in his wheelhouse, and I think he's jealous of that, and I think that's why he's trying to sow these seeds of mistrust between Jon and Sansa. But unlike Peter Baelish, who can change his alliances and allegiances for the drop of a hat and for a coin or whatever, it's different for, you know, people in the North. They have honour, and he's also kind of miffed that Sansa hasn't took to his advances, and so obviously he's trying to ingratiate himself with her, but not really in a way that would be honourable, and she hopefully won't fall for it. We then move on to just north of the Wall, and it's in this area, but I can't exactly pinpoint it, but it's within view of the Wall, because you see here through this load of trees, there's the Wall. It then pans back and you see that it is Uncle Benjen. And Uncle Benjen has obviously brought Meera and Bran as far as he can go, and he explains that this is as far as he can go. And of course Meera and Bran are like, why can't you come? And that's when he reiterates that it's not just made of ice and stone. There's special spells weaved into it, and the dead cannot pass. And bear in mind, he's on the horse, Bran's on the horse, and it's quite good because he can't walk, we know this. And he picks him up and he puts him down on the ground next to this heart tree. And Benjen says, I still fight for the living, but I have to stay here because I can't pass. Only the dead can't pass through the wall. And he says, I wish you good fortune. And he doesn't say in the wars to come, like we've been used to, like when Mance Rayder said it's a reoccurring theme. And I remember thinking, great Uncle Benjen, you're dead, you don't need a horse, why can't you give it to Bran? And it cuts to an important thing, where we realise is that he's going to do something, and Mera's like, are you sure? And he says, I have to know. And of course he puts his hand on the tree, and now he says, I'm the three-eyed raven now, and he is. And it cuts to where we wanted to go, because after all, we'd seen this scene before and it was cut off. And it restarts where he hears the scream in the tower, he goes to run up the stairs, and at the moment earlier, before, when Bran called to him, he turned round. And even though Bran doesn't call to him this time, he still turns around and he doesn't see anything. And you realise that is something that has affected time, and it's now part of the story. Small thing, but it means something. He comes in and he sees Lyanna, and she's lying in a bed and there's blood everywhere, and he shouts, he says her name, and he comes over to her and he takes Sir Arthur Dayne's sword and he puts it there. That'll come up later if I manage to do a video on it. And he sees her, and she's kind of delirious and sweaty, and she's obviously been through a great deal. And if you're into the story and you kind of suspect that she died in a bed of blood and that was childbirth, and it turns out it's true. And she tells Ned, she's missed him and she's scared and she doesn't want to die, and he's like, you're not going to die, I'll help you. And she's like, just listen to me. And she starts to whisper in his ear, and I managed to get with the sound up, she says his name is, but then you can't hear anything, the music changes, it then cuts to Bran, but obviously she's telling him some big secret, and Bran is standing further back from the scene, and unfortunately he can't hear it, but that's no matter. And she says, promise me, Ned. And one of the little handmaidens or whatever comes over and hands Ned a bundle, and the bundle is a baby. And it cuts to Ned, and you actually see the tears rolling from his eyes, and she just keeps saying, promise me, Ned. And it cuts to the baby's face, and the baby's eyes are closed when you first see the baby, and it's slowly the baby's eyes open, and these are these beautiful dark knowing eyes that we kind of get a feeling from. There's importance, and it cuts to Jon, and it starts to pull away, and the music that was playing before builds up to a crescendo, and then it starts to pull away. And this is the confirmation that Jon Snow is the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, and not Ned Stark's bastard. Although Ned didn't lie, he still has his blood still in him. But this is a revelation that people have been waiting for years. And whether or not he's a bastard, or whether or not Lyanna married Rhaegar, we don't know yet, but this may come up later. But it finally answers the question of who his mother is. And he is a Stark. I love the transition from Jon Snow as a baby to Jon Snow in the present. I love that the music, as it started to fade and you were back into a new scene, we realised that Jon's facing Lord Royce from the Vale, complaining about the fact that there's wildling invaders and that they didn't sign up to be with wildlings, and Tormund says, hey, we didn't invade, we were invited. And this dissent is causing some problems, and Jon stands up and says, you know what, we all fought together, the wildlings, the Northmen, and the Knights of the Vale, and my father said that you know your true friends when you fight on the battlefield. And Lord Cerwyn, whose father was skinned alive by Ramsay Bolton, he's like, I just think we should all go home, and this is going to be one of the worst winters, and we should just get the hell out of here. And at that point, you realise that things aren't going so well, but good Lady Mormont gets up and she says, hey, Lord Manderley, your son was killed at the Red Wedding, and yet you've refused the call. Lord Glover, you are supposed to be sworn to Lords, the Starks, and you refuse the call. And she calls out Lord Cerwyn, who stood up earlier. Your father was killed by Ramsay Bolton, and you all refused the call. But Lord, House Mormont remembers, and we listened to, to the call, and we stood up. And he says, where were all you? And she says, House Mormont remembers, the North remembers, and we know no king but the king in the North, whose name is Stark. And I don't care if he's a bastard. Ned Stark's blood runs through his veins, and he's my king from this day until his last day. And I'm telling you, she is one kick-ass young lady. And in the end, Lord Manderley gets up and he says, I never thought we would have another king in the North, in my time, and I'll eternally be sorry that I never stood beside him, and I'll regret it to my dying day. But he is my king, the king in the North, and he salutes him. And Lord Glover gets up and he says, I'm never going to forgive myself for it. And Jon says it's okay, it's fine, Sorry, I'm paraphrasing. He says, there's nothing to forgive. And he says, the king in the North, he's the White Wolf. And as he starts shouting, the king in the North, the king in the North, everybody starts to get up. And they raise their swords in the air, and they're all shouting, the king in the North, the king in the North. And the music's swelling. It's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. And Jon stands up, and he's completely taken aback by it, because in a way it's something he never thought he would ever have. And he's kind of taken aback, and he looks at Sansa, and then Sansa looks across, and Littlefinger's not looking at what's happening in the room. He's staring at Sansa. And the fact that it ends on this sort of tension between Sansa and Littlefinger, you're just hoping that he isn't going to try and screw this moment up, because it's lovely to have this juxtaposition between Jon Snow being dead in the first episode, Sansa being on the run from Ramsay Bolton, to her being finally back in Winterfell with her brother, and things are looking good. And let's just hope that he doesn't screw this up and it becomes a case of, some infighting with the Starks, because I'm starting to like Sansa, but if it turns out to be she becomes manipulated by Peter Baelish, considering he caused a lot of her harms, then I'm really going to be pissed. We then move on to our final scenes of the episode, and these are with Daenerys in Meereen. Now, she's having a quick drink, and she's obviously needing it because she's nervous because of what she has to deal with next. And it's quite telling that she is quite nervous and she needs this liquid courage. Hopefully she's not going to get used to this and turn into a lush like Cersei, but neither here nor there. Now, Daario Naharis comes in, he's sorting the ships, we're all ready to go, he's giving her a kind of report, and he starts to pour himself some drink, and she just says straight up, you're not coming with us. And he's like, what do you mean? Do you want us to come in later and I'll go to Castle Rock and we'll do this? And she's like, no, you're not coming, you're staying here. You're going to stay here and help with the process of Meereen to elect their new leaders, and you're going to take care of the people and so and so. And he at this point is like, fuck the people, fuck Meereen. And she's like, no. She says, I'm having to go to Westeros and I'm going to have to create alliances, and alliances usually mean marriage. And he says, oh, so that's what it is. I can come, you don't need to get rid of me, and who you marrying this time? And she's like, maybe no one, but when I do, I can't bring you along with me, I can't bring my lover. And he's like, fuck that. He says, I just want to be with you. He says, I love you. And she's trying to say in her strong way, and I think he comes off quite needy in this episode, and he admits, I'm in love with you, and why can't you take me with you? And he says, I'm not above it, I'm quite self-pitying and everything. And she's like, I can't, what, you want to be my mistress? Because he tries to say, if you were a king, this would be a different issue. And he even says, oh, this is Tyrion's idea. And she's like, no, it's my idea, and you're going to stay here and sort this out. And she mentions that the Slavers' Bay is now called the Bay of Dragons, and he gives this haphazard curtsy bow and then walks off. Now she mentions just before he leaves, before I forget, that there's many women that'll fill his, that'll fill her place, and he tries to say, no, there won't be another one of you and everything. But I just don't like that even when he bows to her, he's kind of disrespectful and only does half bow. I mean, do you remember when he saw her coming out of the hut and everything was on fire and he was in awe of her? This is where I think he falls down flat, is that when she makes a decision, he's always questioning her decision, and that's just too much, and I'm kind of glad if we never see him again, sorry to say. As she walks into the throne room, Tyrion asks her, so how did he take it? And she says, well, no tears. And Tyrion tries to placate her by saying, you know, a lot of kings and stuff and queens and people in power have to sacrifice stuff. It's a sign of a good ruler, if that makes you feel any better. And she says, well, you're terrible at consoling me because that doesn't make me feel better. And he goes on to explain that you have your armies, you have your dragon, you have your ships, you have everything you could want, and obviously he senses that she's sad that she has to leave a man that loves her, but she says, you know what, I'm leaving a man and, you know, basically saying goodbye to a man that loves me, and actually I didn't feel anything and I'm just eager to get on with it. And she does admit with a nod that she is scared, but she's just anxious to get on with the next phase, you know, to get on and moving. And Tyrion says, you know, I've never really believed in anything, family, gods, kings, but you know what, I've always been a cynic, but I believe in you. And he's basically saying you're the real deal, and it's quite true. And she's totally touched by that, and she gets a recreation of a Hand of the King, or in this case Queen, pin, and as she puts it on his chest, you can see how much it means to him. And this picture here, he's near tears. And at this point, he's totally earned this. It's not like before when he was the Hand of the King and it was simply to fill in for his father. This time he earned it, and he gets down and he kneels and bows. And this is where he differs from Daario Naharis. He doesn't really respect her ruler and the fact that she's a strong, powerful woman. He's too busy thinking about what's between her legs. I'm sorry to say, but it's true. So in that way, I love the fact that Tyrion is just seeing that she's the real deal and that she is in the big game and that he's behind her, and he respects her as a ruler and that she's someone worth giving his life and service to, and it has nothing to do with man or woman. But with Daario, I'm sorry, I didn't really feel him, but Tyrion did the right thing. He believes in her, and when he bowed down to her, it had to be one of the most happiest moments in his life to have someone to believe in. And I think it was a true testament to how great a ruler Daenerys is and will be when we get to the Seven Kingdoms. And in the final scene of the episode, and indeed the season, we see a Greyjoy flag flickering from one side to the other, and as it straightens up, this is what we see, and it's as if they're saying that the wind is in the right position and they're moving on. And we see Theon and Yara on their ship, and they're obviously invigorated being on the side of the Targaryens, and they're off ready for moving across to Westeros. And as we cut to one of the Targaryen ships, we see that it was one of the slaver ships, but it's been replaced with a dragon head on the front. And Grey Worm is manning this ship, and there's a whole bunch of Unsullied, and they're all tooled up ready to go. It then cuts to above the scene where we see the sails of the House Martell with the sun and the spear to the House Tyrell's ships, and you realise that they've both thrown their lot in, that Varys has been successful, and they have joined Dany's mission to conquer Westeros. We cut to another ship where we see Dothraki, and obviously they're not used to travelling on water, so the fact that she's managed to bring these people together is amazing. And they're readying supplies and stuff, and from down below where the horses are kept, we see Drogon fly above, and it's a most beautiful sight, and he's big and transplendent, and you see that not only is Drogon free to fly above the ships, but so is Rhaegal and Viserion. And obviously to see them flourish like this is fantastic, and it cuts to a side view of Daenerys and Tyrion, Varys and Melisandre, and they're in their ship, and Tyrion's watching, and so is Dany, and it's a beautiful sight to see our dragons flying above, and there's this look of determination. You know, this is it, this is what I've been waiting for all my life. I am geared up, I've got all the tools, I've brought all these people together. it's time to go to Westeros, and they're all together. And we get a final shot where above we see all 3 dragons, and they're obviously flying over, and you see how many ships there are. There are hundreds of ships. The sheer scale of it all, I mean, how many people she has in filling all of those ships that she's got. I mean, she has Theon and Yara from House Greyjoy. She has Lady Olenna with her troops in her boats from House Tyrell. She's got the House Martell taken over by Ellaria Sand and the Sand Snakes. She's got her Dothraki. She's got her Unsullied. She has a massive army of all these people, and she has 3 dragons. She has the Smarts, Barrys and Tyrion. She has everything going for her, and she's finally going to Westeros. And it kind of made me think of when Aegon, the first conqueror of Westeros, came to Westeros to take over, to be the conqueror. And although she's technically going home, she's never actually stepped foot on Westeros, because she was born on Dragonstone before she was taken across the Narrow Sea to Pentos. So now she's all geared up and ready to go, and it's just amazing to think how long it's took to get here, and I'm so pleased that we finally made it, and she's finally on those ships. And she's ready, and it's a new change, it's a whole new dynamic in Westeros from next season. So there you have it, that's the finale episode. This is the season wrapped up. I think we've came away on some fantastic things that have happened in this episode. It really tied things up for me, and I hope for everyone else. I like the fact that although it was a massive mess in King's Landing with Cersei's coup to kill off her enemies, I actually think it's probably for the best, because as much as I liked Margaery, and they've got Loras and Kevan Lannister and you know, Mace Tyrell and the High Sparrow, it's a terrible thing to say, but as much as they served a purpose, the fact that they've all been wiped out, it makes sense that Cersei would mass attack all her enemies at once, and she took full advantage of it because she was able to do the thing that most people wouldn't do. I still think that although she is happy that she got rid of her enemies, it's the cost of her son, and although she's on the Iron Throne, I think she's going to turn to the Ares route. I think she's going to be more like the Mad King, or in this case the Mad Queen, and that Jaime's going to have a lot of problems with her next season. But the fact that we had a mass cull of characters, I think it's going to help tighten the stories, because sometimes having so many characters and having to make sure that they're all having screen time and having their own bit, it kind of detracts from it. And with her being on the Iron Throne, now clearly an antagonist and someone you don't like and don't think should be on the Iron Throne, it means it'll make it so much easier for when Daenerys comes in to overthrow her, because we don't like her. We don't like Cersei, and Daenerys is everything good, and the fact that she brings peoples together, she's brought warring people and people that shouldn't want to do this. I mean, she's made the Dothraki travel across the sea, which they class as the Poison Sea, and they're against that by principle, and she's managed to bring and unite all these different factions together. And you need someone that is going to bring people together, not split them apart like Cersei has. And the fact that she's made enemies with Dorne, notorious for being very hard to fight against, and they've got a long history of being able to... Even Aegon the Conqueror couldn't get Dorne under control. It actually took a marriage with House Targaryen to actually integrate Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms. And with House Tyrell, with her wiping out the heir, the heir's son, and the queen, the granddaughter Margaery, people might not remember this, they have the best army, and they also grow a lot of the food, so I think that's going to cause some unrest in King's Landing when the food shortages are going to come in. As much as she's queen, I think Cersei's going to find that she's not going to be seen as someone that would liberate or help the people. She doesn't care about the people, and I think she's going to people are going to suffer under her reign, but it'll be interesting to see. Everything to do with finally seeing Arya back in Westeros and getting revenge on Walder Frey was fantastic, and unfortunately we didn't get to see her in Winterfell. Speaking of Winterfell, I think it's amazing that we got to see the rest of the vision, and it is confirmed by the writers and the creators of the show that R plus L equals J, and that's the long held belief that Rhaegar and Lyanna are the parents of Jon Snow. I actually think that he's probably not even a bastard. I think that Rhaegar wanted to marry Lyanna, and they do have multiple marriages in the Targaryen family, and if he married her then he is a legitimate heir, and that would explain why Sir Arthur Dayne and those knights refused to leave Lyanna when she was pregnant and about to give birth, even though they should have been protecting Rhaegar. And obviously he died, so they were protecting her come what may, because she was giving birth to another heir. And to see him being crowned King of the North is amazing. It's brilliant to see, but you're kind of hoping that he'll be able to keep those really honourable Northerners together. It's a different thing with the Watch, because there's a lot of dissent in there, and hopefully the Littlefinger thing won't affect too much Sansa. That's the one thing I'm worried about, is that, you know, Littlefinger might try to drive a wedge between Sansa and Jon. Hopefully that won't happen. And obviously the Daenerys thing is, I was quite happy to see Dario be left behind. I think he's ran his course. I love that Tyrion is being recognised in his own right as someone that should be Hand of the Queen, because he's the best person, not just because he's filling in a role like he did before. He never got any credit for anything he did when he was Hand of the King. His father came back into the job and he was swept aside as usual. And now he's Hand of the Queen rightfully, and I think he's going to prove himself even more so than he already has to be the right person. And obviously it ending with her and all the different factions that she's brought together heading over to Westeros, it really cements the season to this is where we were coming to. Seeing Jon Snow brought back, Jon Snow being seen as the head or someone to follow in the North and being the King of the North, and you're hoping that he can be the one to hold them together and lead, and hopefully not make the same mistakes that Rob did. The creators of the show really have come off on a high. They also did the episode, so David Benioff and D.B. Weiss did a brilliant job writing the episode. I think the music was totally amazing. I think one of the best pieces of music that we've had for a long time, with the Light of the Seven, the scenes that happened in King's Landing, along with obviously the Stark theme, the Game of Thrones theme, and of course the Rains of Castamere. I think visually it was beautiful. It was great seeing the dragons again. I'm always a big fan of that. I would have liked to have seen Ghost, but I think we'll see more of him next season, and they're firmly got their feet under the table back in Winterfell. And to say I'm happy is an understatement. It's so nice to end on a high note, and although Cersei is not who you'd like on the Iron Throne, the fact that she is, it'll be an interesting dynamic seeing her from next season. I think she's going to be a very decisive and much hated figure. I don't even think the people will like her, and she's very much going to be much like the Mad King. And considering she's a Lannister and not a Targaryen, it just goes to show you that madness does not just run in the family, that she's just plain mad. She's just crazy, and it'll be so much nicer seeing Daenerys go up against Cersei rather than Daenerys trying to overthrow Tommen, who's just a kid, because you don't want Daenerys to come off as a bad person whilst trying to overthrow a child, and it makes it easier for her in the future fight with Cersei. So overall I would give the episode a 10 out of 10. I couldn't rate it any higher. I think it's definitely the pinnacle, and they've built up all the tensions and managed to wind everything up really well. And at least with the wait that we have to wait for the next season, it's more bearable knowing that at least it was rounded off this episode, that we weren't left with a massive cliffhanger. And I hope you've enjoyed this review. I'm sorry I prattle on and it's took ages to do this review, but I'm really looking forward to getting back to my Game of Thrones series, with the Age of Heroes being part 2, and I'd love to have your feedback and your thoughts and everything, and I really hope you've enjoyed the review. Comment, like and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.